Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's a weird one. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that other video that I sent you the link to, the
this morning
neurologist guy. Yeah, have a look at that one and see what you think about. He talks about the way that the brain processes sensory information, which pertains to what we've been talking about, and the fact that we are quantum creatures. Our consciousness is quantum, and which means that our normal sense of time is not operating. That we can get an input, a sensory input, which then takes half a second to process, and all the different bits of the brain go off, and it sends that information back to the start, to when we get the sensory input. It's a fascinating concept, and I left a comment on his video, on that video, to say, well, is that how Lionel Messi is such a great football player? Because when he kicks the ball, it's quite often the ball's in the back of the net within half a second. So when he kicks the ball, does he already know that he's scored?
Yeah.
So that because I haven't heard about this, that during that half a second, what happens if there's another relevant sensory input during that half a second, which pertains to the first sensory input? In other words, the first sensory input is, I'm going to kick the ball. How do I do this? And your brain starts to process that to send it back. And you've already hit the ball during that process, during that calculation process. And do you know the successful? Are there people whose brains can calculate the successful outcome and see the successful outcome having happened, so that they know that worked? Is that what makes Messi different from everybody else? Because he runs rings around everybody else. I watch him in slow motion, you know.
Yeah.
I watch what's happening in slow motion, and because I'm watching, I know the frame rate that I'm looking at, so it's 30 frames a second. So when I press the frame advance button, I know a 30th of a second has gone by, and Lionel Messi is half a second ahead of everybody. He's moving, nobody else is moving. He's the only one moving to get that ball. Why does he know where the ball's going to go and nobody else does? He even knows where the ball's going to go when it doesn't seem as though the person who kicked the ball to him could possibly know where it was going. They don't know, because it's just like there was one guy. It was effectively an overhead kick. He probably couldn't know where it was going to go, because he wouldn't be able to see where it was going anyway. Because by the time the ball arrived where it was going, he was lying flat on the ground on his back, gasping for breath, because he's landed in a heap. But Messi knew where that ball was going and just meets it and puts it in the back of the goal, and nobody else does. It must be, I think, something to do with that, to do with the way that tennis players do it too. You watch the youngster just now, Alcaraz. Alcaraz is so quick, and people comment on his speed, but it's not that he is running faster, he's reacting faster. He knows where that ball's going almost before it's been hit, and again, that's all within the half a second time frame.
Yeah.
So is he getting information from the successful pursuit of his objective? Like, he'll run for a ball and everybody thinks he can't get that ball, and he does, and he gets it with a couple of inches to spare. And when the ball's going at 100 miles an hour and he gets it with a couple of inches to spare, what kind of fraction of a second is the difference between getting the shot and not getting the shot, you know? And is the brain calculating that, all going back in time, reiterating all the time? It's a fascinating idea.
It is, and anytime I've experienced something like that, it's always been unconscious. You know, it's not a conscious decision. You just trust your instincts, you know, and you go with it. And it's, you know, and I even though I'm an athletic person, I don't play football or like that. Well, yeah, I played American football when I was in high school, but my sports of choice are more things like golf and curling, you know, baseball. I was big into baseball when I was a kid. But for me, most of that experience was through music, you know, and used to drive my drummer, John. I shouldn't call him my drummer. One of my best friends, who happened to be a drummer in my band, John. He used to find it remarkable how much I could predict his movements, you know. And so, like at first, you know, he thought it was fascinating, and I'd say to him, like, no, that wasn't fascinating. We're playing a 12-bar song. Like we're having, so every 12 bars, I know we're going to change, because that's the groove we got going. But then when we get more progressive and things are more like, we might hang on something for 500 bars or 3 bars. Like, we don't know. It might not even be a whole bar. Those are the moments where they get more subconscious. And I think, and that's what blows his mind, is because he'll make a change almost like by accident, and I'm on it. Like, there's not like it takes me a beat to catch up. Like, it's on the one, I'm there with him every time. And I don't know where it comes from. You know, he refers to it, and my buddy John, he's one of those guys that, like, I think he has abilities that are different than normal people, and he's also has deficiencies that are different than normal people. Like, he, in some regards, he'd probably be considered disabled, learning disabled, you know, or unintelligent, which, you know, if he's listening right now, John, I don't think you're dumb or at all. I think you're one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. But he knows that, like, there's, like, he doesn't consider himself, he's not book smart, you know, and whatnot. And but the things he does very well. Like, he's the best at everything he does. Like, he's you know, but he might take forever to do it. But the thing about him is he was a premature born baby, like incredibly premature, like weeks and weeks before most children would ever survive. Like, I think his survival percentage was like under 5% when he was born.
Wow.
You know, and his mother had something like 6 or 7 miscarriages before he was born.
Oh gosh.
Right. And it looked like he was probably supposed to be a miscarriage as well, but he didn't. He continued. Right. And because of that, like, I think he's developed differently than most people, right? So, you know, his strengths are unlike anybody else's, and his weaknesses are different from anybody else's. And so he perceives things in ways that I've never, like, the way he talks about things are so foreign to me, you know. And so he apparently sees auras, right? And he sees lines of connectivity. And he knows when I'm going to start doing this. He knows when I'm going to predict his movements, because he says he sees a blue line in the room that connects our heads. And he says that once he sees that blue line, he knows he can do whatever he wants, and I'm going to be there with him.
Wow.
You know, and I've never seen the blue line. I don't experience it. I don't know when we're in it and when we're not, you know. And like one time too, like, because this isn't just something we do in jam sessions. We've done this live in front of audiences before, that him and I, right? Like, one time he called me up and he says, I'm going to a birthday party tonight, and there's going to be jamming. My drums are going to be there. Did you want to come? Do you want to bring your guitar and come with us? And I was like, yeah, I had nothing to do. So I was like, yeah, let's go. And I drove like 2 hours into the country to this like big shop. This guy was like a metal former. He made like eaves troughing for houses and siding and everything. And he was throwing a big birthday party in his shop. So there was like, the whole town was in the shop, this little town called Milverton. And there was like 100 people in the shop here, all getting drunk and smoking dope, and people are taking turns jamming and everything. And there's a guitar player there too named Meese, who has a guitar that weighs about 80 pounds. It's made of stone, completely made of stone. And this guy makes headstones for a living, so he thought it'd be cool to make a guitar out of stone. And the guitar strap is an old Cadillac out of his seatbelt out of a Cadillac that buckles in still and everything. It's, you know, it's possible to play, and it sounds very cold and thin, but it's a cool guitar. So anyway, we were jamming, and it's like a lot of blues and Eric Clapton songs and a lot of stuff I'm not interested in. And not to knock Eric Clapton or anything, I just don't like his music for the most part. So John and I decided, like, John's like, everybody was winding down. He's like, it's time for us to play. Like, let's get up there and let's show them what we can do. And earlier in that night, I'd eaten 6 marijuana cookies. And I got warned, only eat half a cookie. So I'm like, half a cookie, how about half a dozen? You know, so I ate all these cookies, and I was in some rough shape. Like, I was having a hard time talking to people, and, you know, but musically I'm fine. I can play my guitar. As long as I'm awake, I can play my guitar. So we set up, and we were playing, and we were doing this weird stuff. Like, we were going all Middle Eastern. It was sounding like the Secret Chiefs 3, you know. It was getting really weird. And which John sometimes doesn't jive with, but he was into it. Like, he was throwing me all these weird African beats and rhythms, like things he wouldn't play either. And we were locking in. And then at one point I had an outer body experience. And so I was floating above us. I was looking down. I was actually right above John, watching his drums like it was like a camera on YouTube, you know, and I was sinking in. Like, every time I saw his arms moving, I was making sure I was hitting a string every time he hit a drum, you know, and it was incredible. And it just went nuts. And I remember, like, after we played, like, the room was speechless. The guy at the stone guitar came up to us, and he was like freaking out. He's like, I have never seen anything like that in my life. And I was like, did you like it? And then he responded by going, "I've never seen anything like that in my life." So I don't, I don't think he liked the music, but he was blown away by what we were doing. And so afterwards, me and John are having a drink out by the fire, talking about it. And John was like, "That was remarkable, man. I can't believe you pulled that off. That was really good." And I was like, "Yeah, I was having like all these weird experiences, man. Like I was out of my body." He's like, "Yeah, I know." I'm like, "What do you mean, you know?" He's like, "You're above me. You're floating right above the drum kit for like 5 minutes when we were like really pulling that shit off. It was crazy. I knew you were there, so I just went nuts."
Oh my God.
And I'm like, "What the hell?" Like, you know, it's one thing for someone to have an anecdotal experience about their own outer body, but for someone else to be like, "Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I saw you floating around."
Yeah.
You know, like it was... And he, you know, he talks about that all the time. He thinks it's great. Like he bragged to his friends about the 6 cookies I ate and outer body experience and all that stuff. And it's, he's the one that says I'm an alien. He's the one that's sure that I'm an alien. And I'm going,
if you can see
I don't know. I think he might be the alien.
If you can see the blue line and he knows you were floating above his drum kit, one of you is definitely not normal.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Exactly right. So
but it's interesting. It's interesting that you're saying that he's a premature child, you know, premature baby, and that so he. What you're suggesting there is that there was that period, that last period that you and I spent in the womb, presumably. I don't remember it. Yeah. He didn't. He was in the world at that point.
Yeah.
And presumably in a ventilator or in one of these wee boxes or whatever it was that he was in. But he was taken in the world at that point, and probably was his brain connecting in ways that ours didn't because of that. I don't dismiss these things at all. I think the more we know about the way the mind works and the quantum elements of the mind and all of that, it does lead to me to the inevitable conclusion that our experience of the world is nominal. It could be a completely different experience if that was the experience that was required. If you look at, you've got a little baby in the house just now, which I saw your picture of wee Mac. God, what a wee poppet. Absolutely brilliant. I love babies at that stage. They're just so filled with everything. They're just looking around.
I know.
Well, you'll see her. She's probably already doing it. You sent me some sounds that she was making. She's already doing it. She's gathering language, and it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese, British, German, South African. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter where that baby came from. If that baby's exposed to just the sounds of the language, they'll get that language, and they're doing that. Nobody knows how they do it. Noam Chomsky spent quite a bit of his career trying to figure out how they do it, and nobody knows how they do it. And there's that way of gathering the world to yourself and making sense of it. I think you cope with the world that you're in. So maybe your drummer friend, John, maybe the world that he got is the world you would get if you didn't spend that last few weeks in the womb. Maybe that's the way it is. Maybe you develop a whole bunch of different stuff, and the idea that we are quantum computers, quantum minds, our experience is quantum, and we are quantum creatures, means that you have to accept that means we might not be bound by space and time. That space and time might be the experience we're having, but we're not bound by it. And what we have called up to this point extrasensory perception or intuition or gut instinct or whatever it is, that all that kind of woo stuff that science really has traditionally stayed away from, might be the most interesting thing that we've got to discover. You know, if you accept the fact that the quantum mind exists, then you have to accept there are all of these implications of that mean real stuff in the real world. You know, like you end up with Lionel Messi, you end up with Carlos Alcaraz, you end up with a musical experience like what you just described. All of that's possible because otherwise it's taken as apocryphal. You know, science treats it as, well, it's just the reason that the tennis player can do it is that they have the experience to know how to know where the ball's going. That's experience, and it's all calculations, and it's just, but it's not. It really isn't. It isn't that at all. And the standard neurological model that incorporates computation and says it's the neurons doing it all, it has completely failed to explain any of these things, and completely fails to come up with any model of consciousness that makes sense. So all of these things all of the sort of psychedelic experiences, the sporting prowess, the intuitions, the feelings, all of that is possible if we are quantum creatures, and it all makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does.